welcome to Unitarian Thoughts. Today's reflection is going to be a little bit different, and because it is related to something more contemporary, perhaps of slightly a political orientation, but not a political orientation related to theology, more to the politics of humanity. And it has to do with some notes and letters and calls that I've been receiving for the Unitarian Church here in Cork from people in the U.S., predominantly Unitarians, who are feeling distressed, unsafe, and some of them feeling persecuted by the current political climate in the U.S., particularly our brethren of the LGBT plus community feel unsafe, and they're asking questions like, oh gee, what's it like in Ireland? Is there a legal way that's possible for me to get there? One of the reasons that it touches me is because recently celebrating Pride Month here in Ireland, and our church has been active in that movement for some time, and we actually have a long historical connection here with the U.S. And it goes back to the 1800s, and something rather famous that happened with our church, and it's kind of an interesting thing to see that once again Cork is a source of freedom and hope for some people in America who are being persecuted or abused. So the event I'm referring to was Frederick Douglass. He was an American abolitionist. He was born in slavery. He managed to do some amazing things. While a slave, he managed to self-educate himself using books that he found or borrowed or stole and studied, and he had a little bit of tutoring help on the sides, and he was able to actually raise himself to a fairly sophisticated level of reading and writing and oratory because the books that he found turned out to be very excellent for that. And then he managed to plan and execute his own escape to the Free Territories. And instead of just seeking out and enjoying his freedom, he actually then became an active abolitionist. And he became kind of a celebrity and well known because he was a former slave, and he was so articulate he could speak out and demonstrate that Africans were just as capable of higher level functions than any Caucasian person or white person. And that was part of the bigotry that was used to justify slavery, that somehow, yeah, they're human, but they're less human. They just can't, they just don't have it upstairs. Well, Frederick Douglass was articulate enough to show people that. You might be interested to know that Frederick Douglass was actually a minister at one point. After moving to New Bedford, Massachusetts, he was extremely disappointed by the segregation and condescending manner he found in the Northern Methodist churches at the time. So Frederick Douglass joined the African Methodist Episcopal, AME it's called, Zion Church. And in 1839, he became a licensed preacher for that church. Although Douglass wrote later that he looked back at the time in the AME Zion Church with great joy, he did not remain with it for more than a few years, saying that it consented to the same spirit which held my brethren in chains. So in other words, he stopped his active ministry for that church because that church was complacent in allowing the social situation which resulted in slavery. So, should churches be involved in politics or political movements, or should they just be complacent in slavery? And that question is one faces churches today in the U.S. and in Ireland and elsewhere as well. So there's a connection between Frederick Douglass and the Unitarians, and Cork was not Frederick Douglass's first exposure to Unitarians. Douglass had previously spoken at the Unitarian Meeting House in Uxbridge, Massachusetts, back in 1845. Now, New England churches at the time were generally supportive of the abolitionist movement, but the feeling was not unanimous, and the Uxbridge Evangelical Congregationalist minister, John Orkalt, had been warning his parishioners against attending Douglass's planned address across the town in the Unitarian Meeting House. During his speech at the Unitarian Meeting House, Douglass reflected on this opposition, saying, "If I go bleeding and panting, fugitive as I am, to yonder Orthodox Church, I am bolted out by your Reverend Mr. Alcott." So, Douglass was good at calling things as they were and calling people out for what they were. He could be prophetic, speaking truth to power. But after leaving the Unitarian Meeting House there, Douglass was soon to leave for Europe, where he would again experience Unitarian hospitality during his 3-week portion of the trip that he spent in Cork City, beginning in October 1845. Douglass's trip to Europe served 2 purposes. First, it was to promote the worldwide abolitionist cause. Second, it was a self-imposed exile to protect him from kidnapping. After Douglass escaped from slavery, he enjoyed relative safety in Massachusetts. This freedom was not absolute, because while Massachusetts did not allow slavery, Douglass continued to be a potential target for bounty hunters, they were called at the time slave catchers, who could forcibly return him to slavery in the southern U.S. states. This threat was much more acute when Douglass began to attract major attention as a vocal abolitionist spokesperson, author of an autobiography about his life as a slave, and even becoming the subject of a popular abolitionist folk song. Now, Douglass's experience in Cork was facilitated by Richard Dowden, who was both the mayor and the treasurer of Cork Unitarian Church. Mayor Dowden and Quaker Billy Martin, along with Unitarians Thomas Jennings and his daughter Isabel, accompanied Douglass through his stay in Cork. This facilitated Douglass' introduction to other Cork notables, such as Theobald Matthew, the Apostle of Temperance. He had close ties with the Unitarian Church, who had covered his debts accrued as a consequence of his relief during the Cork's typhus epidemic. Douglass also stayed with the Jennings family in Cork. They ran the Jennings Soda Water Company and resided in an upscale house on Brown Street. Ironically, during his stay in Cork, Douglass learned they had recently been sold. It was now considered the property of Hugh Ault, the brother of Thomas Ault, his previous owner. An arrangement was made in 1846 to ransom Douglass by purchasing his freedom. This project involved collaboration on both sides of the Atlantic and was organized by Andrew Richardson of Newcastle, a relative of Cork Unitarian Ann Jennings, who had opened her home to Douglass during his stay. At the conclusion of Douglass's stay, Mayor Dowden presented Douglass with a gold signet ring on behalf of the people of Cork. Douglass was very moved by this gift, stating it was the first piece of jewelry he ever owned. In a letter written from Limerick to Richard Dowden, Douglass thanked him for the many attentions which you pleased to show me during my somewhat protracted stay in Cork. trampled, reviled, and maltreated as I have been by white people, you may readily imagine the grateful emotions which thrill my heart when I meet with facts, forever dispelling the darkness of such infernal doctrines. Frederick Douglass died on February 20th in 1895, 50 years after his visit to Cork. At the time of his death, on the little finger of his right hand, Frederick Douglass was still wearing the ring presented to him by Richard Dowden. So why do I tell this story? I'm telling the story because there was something very special that happened back then, just before or at the start of the Great Famine here in Ireland, that we opened our doors in Cork, and the Unitarian Church helped lead the way to that, to bring Frederick Douglass and give him a safe place and buy his freedom. Today we have friends, brethren in the U.S. and in other places. And we need to remember who we are and where we stand on these issues, and when it's our place to speak up for them. That's what we've done in the past. That's who we are. And I'll leave it up to each of you to decide how you would do it again. And today, I wish you the blessing. May we remember the spirit of courage and friendship of people like Frederick Douglass. How Frederick Douglass was inspired by people in Ireland who were fighting for their freedom as he was fighting for his. How he was inspired by people who could see past the prejudice and bigotry that he had experienced and see him as a human being of dignity and worth. And may we also be blessed and inspired by the reverse, by Frederick Douglass's coming to us. And may we see and be inspired and blessed by the Frederick Douglasses of our generation who knock on our door here in Cork or at the Unitarian Church and say, I'm looking for safety. I'm looking for companionship. I'm looking for a place, someone to help me be a real person and enjoy safety. Blessings to you all, and we'll talk to you the next time.